welcome to edition 15 of All Killa No Filla podcast with me, Rachel Fairburn, and Kiri Pritchard McLean. We're just going to do our usual disclaimer before we start. We are not advocating murder, we're not taking any enjoyment in it, we're not encouraging you to go and do any murders. We just do it because we have an interest in serial murders. As long as we're doing this podcast, it stops us from writing to murderers in prison.
And this is one that we could write to in prison because he's still there and apparently writes to people.
Let's do it.
No, I've not got the time. I barely speak to my parents on the phone. I'm not going to write to it.
I was going to say, I've got a writing set that I got for Christmas about 20 years ago that I've been meaning to use up, so I might...
Has it got field mice in the corner? I feel like they all have.
With on one of those little pieces of grass. Yeah, lovely.
We're looking, this is episode
15,
and we're looking at Edward Kemper. The third, in fact, is his fault because there was an Edward Kemper... Edmund. What did I say?
Edward.
Oh, fucking hell. I've been Googling that all weekend as well. Edmund Kemper, Senior and Junior, or at least there was until the third came along because he offed one of the others. He's a good one, this one. His nickname was the Co-Ed Killer.
Yeah, or the Co-Ed Butcher, some people say, but that doesn't work, so I don't mind bother.
No, get some alliteration in there.
Yeah. In fact, he was born in Burbank, so they could have called him the Burbank Butcher.
But he wasn't killing around there, was he?
No.
I don't know, it's all just American.
But all we're saying is Co-Ed Killer just sounds better.
Yeah. So he's got, if you play the drinking game to this, you're going to be finishing a lot of your drinks because he had quite a typical serial killer upbringing, didn't he?
He did. He was born in 1948 in Burbank, as I've mentioned. Middle of 3 children. He had 2 sisters. He had very strict parents who were disciplinarians.
Yeah. And they divorced when he was 9 and he took it quite hard. Apparently his mother was quite abusive.
Yeah.
There's rumours that she was an alcoholic as well. But only from him.
Yeah, from him, because he's got issues with his mother.
Well, that is one of the biggest understatements I've ever heard.
He said she was harsh, aggressive, verbally abusive, but I'll be honest with you, I have all of those characteristics. And I haven't made anybody kill anybody, as far as I know.
He's really smart. That's the first thing you need to know about Edmund Kemper.
IQ of 145,
Yeah. When he was... Because his first murder started when he was 15, and his IQ was 138 then. He was also 6'9". He's a really big lad, right? Very smart. And he became sort of very literate in psychology. So he says that because he used to cut the heads off his victims, he says that he remembers in his childhood, he had 2 pet chickens, and his mother sent his father out with a hatchet to kill them for dinner, and he got really upset, and he just went out on his bike and he just rode around the block crying, and then when he got back, his mum made him eat the heads, and then he's gone, and that is why I'm a murderer.
Well, I'll be honest, if I was given chicken head instead of chicken breast when that's on offer, I think I'd go a bit bonkers as well.
Oh yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah,
Eat those chicken heads.
At least give us the feet or a thigh or something. But then also, my parents made me eat liver. I don't feel the need to cut them out of strangers just to spite them. We all eat things we don't want every now and then, don't we? The amount of fucking kedgeree I had growing up, horrible stuff. Don't give kids haddock. If you take away anything from this podcast.
If you learn one thing from this podcast, it's do not give kids haddock.
But it got weird quick. His sister said she remembered playing a game where he wanted to play where she would lead him and sit him on a chair at his behest, then put a blindfold at him and then pretend to pull a lever, and he would pretend that he was being executed.
Oh God, what a laugh.
It's not Lego, is it?
What a laugh. Although that is just a game, though.
It is just a game, yeah. I mean, all the weird, fucked up games that I played when I was a kid, I'm sure if you brought them out now... Actually, I say that, I can't think of anything.
I used to play... I was an only child for 6 years. Obviously, my parents thought, right, this one is not normal. We'll have to have another one. I used to play pirates in the backyard, and I used to get the washing line on my own in the rain and shout, "Hoist up the mainsail, secure the rigging." And that's all I used to do for hours. But I played it as a child, and I'm not a pirate now.
No, that's true.
So,
You're fond of rum, though, aren't you?
I love a bit of rum.
And gold doubloons, that's the other thing you should know about Rachel. There's a weird bit in here where his mum starts locking him in the basement.
Yes.
Because he was fucking huge, people were just sort of wary of him, because I think everyone was like, he could just flip out, and then what would happen? Because he was quite withdrawn and sullen. He was a classic teenager in that respect. And he'd started torturing animals, hadn't he? He killed the 2 cats. One of them, he cut its head off, and the other one, he buried it alive, and then dug it up again when it had died to torture it. So he was already exhibiting quite strong serial killer signs, and I think they were just like, we're really worried that Ed is fucking weird.
Well, he also used to cut the heads off his sister's dolls.
Yeah.
Which just sounds like something an annoying brother would do.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, it might have been a bit more
That
sinister.
on its own is fine, but when you put it with a cat's thing, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're in big trouble.
And the fact that when he was 10, he had a bit of a crush on his teacher, asked about it. He said if he ever had to kiss her, he'd have to kill her. Maybe he was just a really good kisser. And, like, she could not go through life knowing that that's as good as it's going to get.
Or a really bad kisser, in which case it's like, well, if I kiss you, you'll tell people, and then I'll have to kill you. But his mum locked him in the basement with no window to sleep, which is horrendous, but her reasoning behind it was even more fucked up.
Yeah, she was scared that he was going to rape his sisters.
If you're thinking that, there must be a number you can call.
Yeah.
Like, don't start, I'll take positive action myself. Be like, no, call in the professionals. Him and his mum had this really sort of tempestuous relationship where he would belittle him, and after the divorce, his father went and lived somewhere else, and he went to find his dad. Mm-hmm. And he sort of turned up, and then he found out that his dad had a new son and a new wife and basically a new family, and he didn't take it brilliantly. He felt a bit rejected. So he was there for a couple of months, and then they sent him away, didn't they, his dad?
They did, probably because he was big and weird. I'm sick of your weird, massive son being in my house. He's got to go. He's like a dog that nobody wants, really, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Like a big Great Dane that's legs are going that nobody cares about. So they sent him then to live with his paternal grandparents on their farm, which sounds delightful. However,
yeah, it does. Although, if you've got a son and you're like, oh, he's big and he's weird and he's creepy, I'll probably send him to live with my elderly parents, and then everything will be fine.
Well, as it turns out, this is where it all kicks off, because his grandmother was like his mother because she liked to discipline him. Edmund obviously didn't understand that you can't go through life without being told off, and he had access to a gun as well, didn't he?
They bought him a gun, and he had a dog, and he used to go out shooting. He'd shoot gophers and things, and he'd shoot birds, or even though he was told not to. Which, I mean, I don't know why they fixate on that in every interview. Like, he shot the birds and he was told not to. He also cut his mum's head off and fucked it. So, really, that's not, as barometers go, I'd say the birds thing we can let slide now. But this relationship he got in with his grandma started to be really sort of oppressive. He really hated her. She didn't trust him at all. And he just was really unhappy there. He said his granddad was senile and he didn't want to be stuck there out in the middle of nowhere. So he got him a gun and a dog. He used to go off. And apparently he used to like line his grandma up in his sight lines, like hide on the farm and be like, I could just do it. I could just kill her. His granddad had a gun as well. Like a particularly, I don't know if I'll call about guns, but a gun that his grandma was like, don't you touch that. Maud, her name was. Maud was like, don't touch that. And it got to the point where she didn't trust him not to steal it, so she would take it out with her and out the house. And Edmund found out about this and got really pissed off, like, oh, you don't trust me? And it's like, well, how did you find out that the gun wasn't there anymore if she wasn't very astute in not trusting you and your bird shooting?
His grandmother was finishing off her latest children's book.
Yeah, which is a weird scene, isn't it?
He shot her in the head.
He said, I'm just going to go out with the dog and the gun, and then turned around and through the screen door, shot her once in the back of her head and then twice in the back. And then his granddad turned up.
Yeah, his granddad turned up. He'd been out shopping somewhere. He's coming back into the house, and Edmund decided to kill him as well because he didn't want him to go through that trauma.
Which is good of him, isn't it?
That is so sweet.
He shot him in the head because he didn't want him to be distressed, which is some fucking incredible logic, isn't it? So that was it, dead grandparents. And the first thing he did
was he rang his mother.
He rang his mum.
Yeah, his awful mother that, he hates so much. He rings his mum, and she said to him, well, you've got to tell the police, which is quite right. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which I think is a bit of a cop-out, because I don't think he was a schizophrenic. I just think I'll just slap that on him and stick him in this. He was sent to a state hospital, a secure hospital, for 5 years.
And he was put through this sort of like juvenile therapy, and I think this was as formative as his childhood, because they really liked him, because most people are sort of reluctant to be there, but he was just like knuckle down and sort of tried to ingratiate himself with the staff, which is something, if you look back, John Wayne Gacy did and other people have done. And they liked him, didn't they?
They did. And one of the descriptions of him, this bloke just says, he was likeable. It's fine for a serial killer, but as a comedian, if you ever get described as likeable, you may as well just shoot yourself.
Yeah.
very likeable, but the output is horrific. Edmund Kemper.
Affable as well.
Affable
Stage presence.
charm.
That's code for shit jokes, isn't it? But yeah, they tested his IQ here, 138. He came out only 15 years old. He became so trusted that they let him be an assistant to the psychiatrists.
Yeah. Which is just one of the worst things they could have done, because he had access to... He was allowed to go through other patients' files and work out sort of what to say and what to do so he appeared rehabilitated. He conned his way out of there.
Yeah, they said a psychiatrist who met him years later, said when he was incarcerated, was like, he knew all the buzzwords. He taught himself how to look like he was on the road to recovery, which is such psychopath behaviour. It's unbelievable. He also, because there was loads of bad people in this juvenile place. There was rapists.
Well, the actual statistics, 1,600 patients, most of them were murderers, and there was 800 sex offenders. Which, to be honest, just sounds like the average Butlins, if you ask me.
That's the one at Pritchard, isn't it?
It is indeed. But that's just, that is a lot of mad, bad people in one place. And he's 15.
Yeah.
And
he's a baby, and he's basically in Arkham Asylum. And he said that he used to talk to... he basically hung out with rapists, which is probably hard not to do when you're there. And so they were telling him about what happened and how they got caught, who they raped. And so basically, at the time he's becoming sort of sexually awakened at 15, all he's hearing about is really violent sexual crimes. So obviously going to warp his idea of what an appropriate sexual relationship is, and also taught him how not to get caught. But I think that, the most worrying thing is that it sort of normalises that behaviour. A bit like when I went to private school and I assumed everyone had a pony.
I think that's worse, actually.
It definitely is. It's definitely been more damaging as I've tried to leave my life.
Apparently he's just sit in his cell and just masturbate all day.
Really?
Yeah. But
Wouldn't we all?
I was going to say, if you're
He's 15.
He's 15. He's in the nut hatch. What else is he going to do?
No.
Can't do much, can he? He was discharged when he was 20, so he's only in there 5 years.
Yeah, 1969 he was let out.
Just in time for the 70s. Discharged with a recommendation that he didn't live with his mother, so naturally they sent him to live with his mother.
Yeah, and his parole board was made up. There was not one psychiatrist or psychologist on it. It was all law enforcement people, so they were like, right, let him out, don't let him near his mum. First thing that the council do is send him to live with his mum. And the world had changed a lot since he'd been in. So basically it's like the 70s, hippies everywhere in Santa Cruz. And he really stood out, not only because he's 6'9" and he's a big lad, because everyone else had like flowing hair and he had very neat hair and a moustache.
He was a square, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was referred to as a square. He wanted to be in the police once he left. He decided he wanted to be in law enforcement, as many psychopaths do. And he was actually, you know how there's a minimum height restriction? There's also a maximum one. He was too tall to be in the police.
I bet he was too tall for roller coasters.
I can't get the thrill of the roller coasters, better just cut these girls' heads off instead. He'd probably really like that one in Alton Towers where you lose a leg.
Jesus. The Kemper.
We're probably going to have to cut that out.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, he wanted to be in the police but got too tall, and then he sulked when he didn't get in and bought himself a motorbike instead.
No, can't buy himself a motorbike. It's like it looks like a real Fisher-Price biker, doesn't it? He's got like a moustache, the hair, and his motorbike, and he's massive. I bet he looks alright.
Well, he got in. He had two motorbike accidents, and one of them, the second one, he broke his arm and he got compensation. And with the compensation, I don't know why he's getting it. I bet he would have fucking annihilated the car he went into. He's huge, isn't he? It'd be like, you know, when a T-Rex like stamps on a car. He bought a car that looked really like an unmarked police car, and then he put a radio in it and added this really long antenna. So basically, to all intents and purposes, it looked like an undercover police car, and that's what he wanted.
And yet no copper saw this and went, well, this is a bit strange. Why is this man driving around in this car that looks like a police car when he's not a policeman? Bear in mind that he's hanging out with coppers as well.
Yeah.
So they would have seen his car. It's weird.
He couldn't be in the police, so he decided to knock about with them. They used to go to this bar that they all went to. Was it called the jury room?
The jury room, yeah.
And he used to sort of knock about and listen to them. And they just used to call him, like, oh, Big Ed's here. They used to call him Big Ed.
Unoriginal.
Yeah. Yeah, again, no critical thinking with the police. So Big Ed used to come down, and he used to sort of keep abreast of the crimes when they were happening. But he said he'd read enough police novels and watched enough TV to know that you don't ask too many questions, because then it'll create suspicion. But he just sort of knocked around with them and realised that they had no leads. So he was sort of safe for a long while.
Once he got his car, he actually planned these murders very well, because he took months sort of practising, picking up hitchhikers.
Apparently he picked up 150 hitchhikers without doing anything, which is amazing, because that means there's 150 people out there who've gone, I got in that guy's car and he didn't. What's wrong with my neck?
Yeah. Why not me?
Yeah. I know, I'd take it like that. I'd take it hard. But he sort of did it in baby steps, in that, so first of all he got the car and was picking up hitchhikers, and then he would drive them farther and farther away into secluded bits and just chat to them. And then he added into his car like a murder kit with plastic bags, knives and a blanket. And then he started carrying a gun around as well. So it all took a year or so to like build up to it. And then he said he knew as soon as he got the gun out one day that one of the rules that he learned from those horrible rapists is never leave any witnesses. So he's like, I knew as soon as I got the gun out, I would have to do it. And he was just waiting for that day to come.
And the day did come.
It did, didn't it? In
7th of May, 1972.
1972.
A double whammy as well. Two friends, Marianne Pesch and Anita Lou Caesar. They were near the university campus in Berkeley. His mother worked
that was the link
at the university campus as well. So they're hitchhiking. He picks them up, gets in the car, and what his technique was, he would... Because obviously, he's a big bloke, which he's mentioned on every documentary at least 90 times.
I think I've done it about 90 times already.
You get it, he's tall. He used to lean across and say, I don't think your door's locked properly. And as he'd lean across to close it, he'd get... This is so specific and a bad advert for chapstick. He would get a chapstick, put it behind the mechanism of the door. You couldn't then get out.
I'm surprised that didn't come up when any of the descriptions of saw a man driving 2 girls away, had very well moisturised lips.
There's a very distinct smell of cherry chapstick. So he drove the 2 girls to this remote spot, pulls out the gun, and he puts poor old Anita in the boot of the car, and he stabs Marianne to death on the back seat.
Well, he tried to suffocate her, and she bit a hole through the bag, God love her.
Oof.
And then he was trying to strangle her with a bit of material, and then that snapped. Rachel doesn't like the C word to describe material.
Can't stand it.
Think of another word while I'm saying it.
Oh.
So tried to strangle her with his material, and then it broke, and then he got really angry, and then he stabbed her. And all this time, this on the back seat, the other side of that seat, is her mate listening to all this, which must have been just horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. He got in Marianne at the back and then stabbed her with a longer knife, apparently. And then he cut their heads off. This is one of his habits. And threw them into a ravine, their heads, and Anita's head and body was never found. And Marianne, he got her body and chopped it up, put it in the bag that he tried to suffocate her in, and then he buried that, which he showed the police years later. After these 2 girls went missing, everyone was like, oh shit, they've been snatched from campus, and everyone started to get a bit worried, because at this time, the city was known as the murder capital of the world.
Welcome to the murder capital of the world.
Because all these girls and people were being murdered, because at the same time there was another serial killer killing called Herbert Mullin, and just 3 years before that, a guy called John Linley Frazier killed a whole family, basically did a Manson on them. So there've been fucking loads of murders. Everyone's really worried. And he used to pick up these hitchhikers because he said he'd learned how to make himself look like he wasn't a threat. And he said, loads of times they'd start talking about, oh God, I wonder who it is who's been killing these girls. And he said they didn't know, but as soon as they mentioned that, they got a free pass. As soon as they mentioned a murder, which has just made me think now, from now on, every car I get into, I'm like, I do a podcast about serial killers and I'm really interested in them.
I just think... So, hey, but if you're going to mention, if you're in a car with him, you're probably thinking, I bet he's that murderer. I'm going to mention those murders.
Do you think?
I think so. Why would you bring that up?
It's a weird thing to mention,
You wouldn't,
isn't it?
If you felt safe, I don't think it'd enter your head.
Yeah.
Hey, so who's this guy that isn't you that's doing all these murders? It's such a strange thing to...
I'm definitely mentioning it the podcast from now on. Like, you know, in Uber taxis, you can change your music. They ask you if you want to put your Spotify on. I'm going to play our podcast and everything to be like, just so you know, I know loads about them and I know how to get away from them. Please don't kill me and cut my head off.
I find it so degrading that you can play your own music in those taxis.
Yeah.
It's just rude.
I think it is as well.
You know what? If you want to play your own music, get your own fucking car.
Let him have TalkSport on.
Oh God, TalkSport. He's like being trapped listening to TalkSport. It's red. Oh God, no. Oh, I'd rather be in a car with Edmund Kemper than listen to TalkSport.
The thing is, if they're going to come over here, they need to integrate. Yeah. That's the only thing I've ever heard said on TalkSport. So, that was 1972, May. Now, in September 1972, he killed his third victim.
Yep. This is a 15-year-old ballet student, Aiko Ku, who was only hitchhiking because she'd missed a bus and she was worried about being late for a dance class.
Bloody buses.
I know! How many more times a bus stop's going to crop up in these?
I think Jack the Ripper is the only time that a bus hasn't appeared in something, isn't it?
Although Horse and Cart did.
Oh yeah, Horse and Cart did. I think that's why there's never been, in central Manchester, there's never been a murderer, because we have the busiest bus route in Europe.
Yes, we do.
So they're all taken off the streets, they're all safe.
So this poor girl, who, like I said, was only hitchhiking because she'd missed a bus and she didn't want to be late for this class, she needed to go to San Francisco, which he picked her up. He took her to San Francisco, but he didn't stop at San Francisco. He just kept going. So this poor girl, she was onto him pretty quickly, actually, wasn't she?
Yeah, because he pulled a gun out and she panicked, and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna lose her." Maybe he hadn't done the old chapstick trick yet, and he basically convinced her that he wanted to kill himself and it was suicide. If she helped talk him down, he would let her go. So he drove up to the mountain, and she was trying to be like, "Come on, you've got something to live for." And then he suffocated with, it was the worst way, right? He put tape over her mouth and then stuffed his thumb and his index finger up her nose until she passed out. And then a few minutes later, she regained consciousness. And so he suffocated her again until she stopped breathing, strangled her with her own scarf, and then he went on to rape her. Fucking horrible.
Do you think that, I've just thought, if you were in the car with him and you would think, oh shit, he's going to kill me, and if he got the gun out, if he turned around and went, "You can't kill me, I was murdered 5 years ago," do you think that would really freak him out?
Try and get away with it like that. I am your mother.
Oh, that's the worst
That's
thing.
the worst thing you could say, isn't it? Yeah. I'm your father? Is that better? And then, so after doing all this, he went to a bar and he got pissed.
Oh, fuck it.
And
Probably with the coppers.
Yeah. And he kept going out to the boot of the car and lifting it up and just looking at her in the boot.
Oh, he's a weirdo.
I don't think it's that point where we ascertain that. I think it might have been at the cats.
Stop looking at it.
No, it is creepy, isn't it? So he kept opening this boot, and then he took her home, back to the house that he lived in with his mum, dissected her, and then buried her hands and her head away from her body, which is another habit they used to do. And they never really found her. They never really found much of her body.
Miserable. But they didn't tie it to the other two murders at all, did they?
No,
they
because
didn't think it was connected.
No, because it was a university ones, and then she was just a kid. She was only 15.
The advice given to hitchhikers at the time, getting cars that had the sticker, wasn't it?
Yeah, with a university sticker in it. They said it'll be safe if you get in one of those, and he had one because his mum worked for the university.
I mean, it's such a weird... Oh, you'll be safe if you get in one of those cars. Unless the murderer's got one of those stickers, which is completely possible.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're going to pick something, like, only get in a car if it's got blank. Don't pick a sticker. Don't pick something that's, like, the most obtainable thing in the world. Just go, don't get in the fucking car.
Don't get in cars with strange men.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what sticker. If it says, "I'm not a murderer, honest," still don't get in the car.
Yeah, just don't get in the car.
And then he had a little break from murdering. Because he obviously murdered his grandparents that they knew about, but it was sort of taken off his record because he was able to buy a .22 caliber pistol, even though it was on record that he was there for murder. There was just...
Well, because they were so trusted when he got out, he managed to have his record expunged. I love that word. Expunged. He was allowed to have, like...
It's mad, isn't it? Well, he would have failed the gun test, but they just sold it to him anyway.
Fucking hell.
It's shit, isn't it?
Yep.
And then in January 1973, so all this is like bam, 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 right after each other, a couple of months, he killed Cindy Shaw.
Yeah, who was a babysitter to one of the policemen he used to drink with.
He drove her to the woods. He made her get into the boot, and then shot her when he got in there. Took her home. As soon as his mum left for work, he had sex with the corpse, and then cut her up in the bath, making sure that he cleaned up after himself, which is more than any man that I've ever lived with did after a bath. So
I've got to say, though, the confidence of just thinking, right, my mum's going out to work, there is no way she's going to pop home, because the time that anyone I lived with would come home unexpectedly, when I'm dissecting a corpse in the bathroom, you just go, oh,
or banging the lad from next door.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had...
I'm not more stressed, because that sounded like I was up to something then. My next door neighbour's 63 and is an alcoholic, nothing's going on.
So he cleaned up, and then he put her in plastic bags and threw the body off a cliff. He loves a cliff or a ravine, doesn't he?
Does indeed.
He kept the head, though, as is his way, and he buried it in his own garden, and it was underneath his mum's window. And it was buried facing up, like looking up to her window. And with classic serial killer wordplay joke, they've got the shittest sense of humour. Terrible. He said, I kept Cindy's head like that because my mum always wanted people to look up to her. Snigger, snigger, snigger.
Ha 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 ha.
What is this? The Viz letters page. Gacy as well, and BTK. We've got
BTK.
Shittest jokes ever.
Terrible.
Serial killer on a box of cereal.
I wonder what sort of stand-up serial killers are into. I wonder what they laugh at. I wonder if
Bob Monkhouse.
I wonder if they like sitting there watching like John Bishop or something. This is all going on. Still, nobody's suspecting.
No, they've not got any leads on him. He's not suspected at all. And then in 1973, February of 1973, he had a huge... So this is only a month later. He had a huge fight with his mum. Now, he blames everything on his mum. And he said, it was only ever when she poked me I would go out. So he had a huge fight with his mum, and he went out, and he got one hitchhiker called Rosalind, and then another one called Alice. Now, Alice only got in because she saw there was another girl in there. So she didn't really want to get in. She was like, oh, there's someone else in there. It'll be fine. He's not going to kill two of us. You're wrong.
Yeah, how wrong?
Plus, she saw the university sticker in the window, and the police had advised that if there's one of those, everything is A-OK. So, how he did it, he didn't even stop the car this time. Didn't even do the old chapstick trick. He's driving along, and he said to Rosalind, oh, what's that out of that window? And pointed to a nice view, and then shot her. He literally did what's that over there? Like it's fucking Tom and Jerry. Turned round, and then he shot Alice, but he didn't kill her. So he slowed down and then shot her at point blank range.
Ooh.
And then pulled over and put them both in the boot.
Miserable.
Horrible. Drove home to his mum's house. Went in. Girls are in the boot. Made an excuse that he needed cigarettes. Left. But then he just drove around the corner. Pulled up in his own yard, right? With the neighbours overlooking. It's about 11 o'clock at night. Just cut their heads out. He just cut their heads off in the yard. And he said in an interview, because you can watch interviews from like mid to late 80s with him, because he loves to chat about his murders.
Oh yeah, he does. He's a talker, all right.
He said that if they'd have just looked out their window, they would have seen him do it, and that was, he said, he got to the point where he just didn't care, and it was part of the thrill of it that he could be caught.
Fucking hell.
And then the next morning, he brought Alice in and had sex with the body. Presumably left the head in the car. Ugh. Brought Rosalind's head in, and he took the bullet out so she couldn't be traced, and then he disposed of the bodies in Santa Cruz, and then he kept driving on and put the heads and hands, because he used to keep the heads and hands separately, in Pacifica. So he had a system.
All this mess, and nobody's like just rocking around with these bodies.
His boot must have stunk. Cause, you know, I was thinking about with that first murder where he's suffocating her, it didn't work, so he started stabbing her. The blood must be all over the upholstery. It must have gone through.
Sunk in. Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah.
I just don't know how people, when they got in the car, were like, oh, it smells like old blood in here. I better get out.
It's a very distinct smell you've got in the car here, Edmund. It's like old blood.
It is quite a specific
one of those
smell, isn't it?
One of those like Yankee Candle things instead of leather.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's the air freshener. They said it was cherry vanilla, but it turns out it's old blood. But he was gearing himself up. Now he says that every murder he did was just a practice for killing his mum. So he decided to test himself. So he picked up these two hippie girls. One of them was carrying flowers and one of them was carrying a doll. He drove them and they asked to be dropped off near where he killed the first two girls. So he was like, well, this is a real test. And the whole time he was like, the gun's under the seat, I could just kill them. But he didn't. He just dropped them off and let them go. And then
so he says.
So, well,
I mean, we don't have any evidence
that's true,
for
isn't
this,
it?
do it? So he can say what he wants.
And to be honest, it's not like we could verify the sources, because if two people who were hippies at that time came forward and were like, yeah, we remember that. It's like, you remember fuck all. You're smoking so much weed and in a smelly Afghan coat. You had no idea what was going on.
In the middle of summer.
Yeah. So really, we can't ever verify that. But he said that was the point when he realised that it wasn't him, it was his mother. And that what he needed to do was to kill his mum. But by this time, the police were sort of on to him in a way, weren't they?
Well, they were. In a really roundabout way, they did have contact with him in a having a knees up down the boozer way. Because there was a routine firearm check. And somebody got hold of Edmund's record because he tried to buy a gun, obviously.
Successfully bought a gun.
Yep, and they were looking at it, and I said, oh, he's had his, as you know, he had his records expunged. So this copper's looking at it, and he's going, oh, hold on, what's this scribbled out in black marker? Holds it up to the light and goes, oh, this bloke killed 2 people. So all the information was there, all it needed was just to, turn it to the light somehow, and you could still read it. So they're a bit concerned about this, and then they looked and he said, oh, he's 6'9", 280 pounds. We're going to have to go on to, we're going to confiscate the guns. Now, on one of the documentaries, there's some guy who's like, yeah, so we're like, oh, this guy's really big, who's going to go and take the guns off him? They sent a junior detective.
The work experience lad.
They sent a junior detective who... Actually, he says that the cop that they sent, he goes, yeah, big man, big gun, little old me, which sounds like an amazing country and western song. But he still wasn't a suspect, because they went to, he was living with his mother at the time. They couldn't find him at first, could they?
No, they were staking out. Basically, he was on like, his house was called like 150 Odeo, and they were staking out the one over the road, which is like 150 Rodeo or something like that. And the only reason they spoke to him is because they came over the road when he was like cleaning his car. You know, the one full of old blood. And they said, excuse me, do you know who lives in that house over there? And he's like, no, why? And he's like, oh, we've been staking it out, but no one's come home. And then he went in with the police officers and he was like, Mum, do you know who lives there? And they were like, which house is it you're after? And they basically read out the name of that house, and there's a weird pause, and they just looked at him and went, Are you Ed Kemper? And he was like, yeah, I am, yeah. Yeah,
all 6'9" of me, that is me. Like, distinguishing features, I'm really big.
But he said there's 3 occasions that police could have caught him, and this gun thing was one, because what happened was he knew he didn't know which gun they'd come to confiscate, because he had 2. He had one in the boot of his car, he had a Magnum, and he had a 22, right? And he said to them, oh, but it's only a little gun. And they said, well, yeah, it's only a Magnum. So he's like, right, they're after the Magnum. So he's like, right, okay, I'll go and get it now. So went into his closet in his room. There's fucking loads of guns in there he's illegally bought, and he's going, oh shit. There's also a rucksack of the girl and an ID of the girls who went missing like 2 days ago, because they found them really quickly. Cindy got found within 24 hours, her body. So if they'd have looked in there was just like a box full of purses and basically trophies. And as he's leaning in there, he remembered, oh shit, no, the gun that they want is in the boot of the car. So he went, oh, sorry, gentlemen, I've led you on a chase here. It's in the boot of my car. I took it out for something. So they went, okay, no problem, and just followed him out again because he was polite. So to me, it's like, oh, well, that's how you get away with a murder. You just mind your P's and Q's.
Oh, I'm ever so sorry about all those
manners cost nothing.
Yeah.
They just they went, okay, right, we're going to take this from you because you shouldn't have been allowed to buy it, and that was it.
And again, not a suspect, not considered, it was just a routine thing. But this panicked him. In his mind, he's going, oh shit, they're onto me. He actually thought...
The net was closing, yeah.
And in actual fact, it just wasn't. So what he decided then was like, right, he thought, I'm going to get found out here. I know what I need to do. I'm going to have to kill my mother, which is a natural sort of progression.
I think that when Edinburgh gets a bit too much, I'm like, oh God, I've got too much to do. I've not done enough writing for myself. Is the game show going to be ready? I'll just kill my mother.
Do you know what? I'm just kill my mum. But the reason he gave for wanting to kill his mother was he didn't want to find out what he'd done because he didn't want it to be embarrassed. But doesn't really tie in with his...
If you don't want to be embarrassed, don't fuck ahead when you've cut it off. That's my first bit of advice for you. Come on, mate, we're not falling for that.
Well, he kills her at 4 a.m. with a claw hammer.
Yeah, he waited for her to go to bed. She came home hammered, is what he said. No pun intended.
Yes, there we go.
He came home drunk. She came home drunk, rather. And then she went to bed, and she was reading a paperback, and he came into her room. And she went, I suppose you're going to want to stay up all night talking. Which is like they have some weird kind of, when you got a needy boyfriend, you're like, oh, this again.
Can we talk? It's 4 a.m.
Can we just cuddle? And that made him flip out. He said it made him really angry. And he said he went out again and then came back in with a claw hammer and he went, no, he said, good night. And then he just fucking caved her head in with it and attacked her with his claw hammer. And he said it was really hard. And this is the only time if you watch interviews with him, he talks about the murders totally normally, but he gets upset and starts to cry. And he insists, he's like, I did love my mum. But then flips out and goes, it's all her fault though. He said that he found it really hard to kill her, like physically hard to do it. And then he said, I cut off her head and I humiliated her, of course. Now, when he says humiliated her, he means he had oral sex with her head.
With his mother's severed head.
And then he put it on a mantelpiece and said to it all the things that he always wanted to say to her.
Ranted and raved at it. He's not finished. He's getting a lot of mileage out of this severed head. He cut out vocal cords and tried to destroy them in the garbage disposal.
And apparently it spat it back up again. And he found that funny. He said because of... What did he say? She'd always been a tough talker or something like that.
Yeah, something about having the last word as well. Or something like
that was it.
So yeah, great serial killer humour there. Again. So he's done all this. He also has a game of darts with the head.
Presumably he needed to wind down after all that.
And just need to relax.
And there's not enough of them to play snooker with, is there? So
this doesn't end here, by the way, because what he does then, rings his mum's friend, invites her over, and kills her.
Yeah, because this is where it falls apart, his argument. He said, this is a direct quote, he said... She was dead because of the way she raised her son. And he later goes on to say he's furious with his mum because 6 people would be alive because if she hadn't treated me so badly. He totally puts all the blame at his mother's feet. He doesn't take any responsibility for his actions. And then this whole kind of, and I knew once she was dead I could stop the killing. Oh yeah, no, that stacks up. Except the fact you phoned a fucking friend, told her to come over, and then killed her.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what was the point? There was no point to that.
No, it was Sally Haley he killed. He called her up, she came over. He said, well, there was rumours that he thought that they wouldn't be able to trace it to him if there was 2 murders. It would look like something else. So that's why he killed her. He slept then next to her naked corpse and cut her head off and then left in her car the next day. And he drove for like 1,500 miles, had the radio on.
A bloody car thief as well.
That's the worst thing about him, if that's me.
Yeah, he had 3 days solid driving, no rest.
Listened to the radio the whole time because he thought that the murder would be heard on the radio. And because it never got mentioned that these bodies had been found, he called the police.
The thing is, he'd been awake for 3 days, driving non-stop. If he'd have just had a nap, he'd probably gotten away with it. It's like tired and emotional.
Just pull it 20 minutes, have a power nap, have a Starbucks.
Everything's fine.
Brush your teeth with some toothpaste and your finger, and you'll be all right.
But he rang the police. But they told him to ring back, didn't they? Yeah,
they went, oh, what, have you done a murder? Can you ring back later? He said, I want to confess I've murdered 2 people. And they went, they didn't believe him. They told him to call back later. But luckily, because he had such good manners, he fucking did.
Okay, I'll call back in a bit. Thank you, bye-bye. Oh, hi, I'm just ringing about those murders again. I can't believe that someone would ring up for that reason and they tell them to ring back.
Well, he was smart. That's like a diamond, but he was smart. He asked to speak to someone specifically.
Yeah, he asked for the cop that had taken his gun.
Yeah, he said, can I speak to, what was his name?
Alufe.
And then he said, listen, I've killed my mum and I've killed this other woman. If you go to the house, you'll find them. And then that was it. He was arrested. I bet, again, I wonder who they sent to arrest him. The cleaning lady.
Yeah. Just finished my shift. Just go and arrest that big fella. The thing is that when they went into the house, he'd cleaned up, and obviously the bodies were there. They were in 2 wardrobes, apparently. He left a note for the police, which said, sorry, gents, for the mess, had no time. Well, you know what? Maybe if you hadn't have done that game of darts on your mum's head, you might have had the time. Because
put a bit of pledge around the place.
It's just that oh, sorry about the mess.
That's like when I faff about too much in the morning, I don't have time to blow dry my hair. I know exactly the feeling he's going through. So, 1973, the October, he was put on trial. Mm-hmm. Now, he pleaded insanity. That's what his defence was, which was so hard for them to get, his defence to get, because he's really articulate and smart. So it's very hard to convince a jury that very together person is insane. Also, the fact that he planned the murders goes against it. But he lied to a psychologist and said that he cannibalised some of the bodies to try and help his case towards insanity.
He's definitely not a cannibal.
It came out later that he wasn't a cannibal at all.
I always think it's quite interesting if a lawyer's trying to get someone with, like, you're insane. It's like, well, you're clearly not, but can you act? Yeah. And just imagine, like, little auditions in the sort of interview
doing
room.
A rehearsal.
Go on, act a bit crazy. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. This. You can't act. It's not going to work.
What's your motivation? It's to not be electrocuted. Try that one. But he tried to slash his wrist twice up into his trial, but he was unsuccessful. And then it took the jury 5 hours to find him guilty of 8 counts of murder. And
he got life imprisonment because at the time the death penalty.
That's when you're punished for not having one of your senses.
My sister actually used to think that the word death was death, and she used to go, you death, all the time. She's not listening to this, it's absolutely fine, so I won't. So the death penalty was suspended at the time, so he just got life imprisonment. So yeah, he's still in there. Yeah,
people write to him, he's very popular to write to. Loves giving an interview as well, because he says it's so people can better understand people like him, but I think he's just loves a bit of attention.
He loves a bit of I think that there needs to come a point where these serial killers interviews stop, because...
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I think it's...
What would we talk about?
Oh, fuck knows. I think it's interesting, but I think they should be quite selective about things, because particularly with him, I was watching an interview with him and I had to turn it off because I was like, he's really enjoying going on and on and on about what he's done. He's actually enjoying it. And it's quite odd. I mean, it's distasteful to watch for a start, says me doing this podcast. But I just think there comes a point where it's like, yeah, it's important to understand and learn from these people. But
I think it should be used in maybe papers and journals, like, scientific stuff, but maybe not on YouTube.
Yeah, that's the thing, because it's so easy to just watch these things.
Yeah. And also they get to rewrite their own history.
Yes.
All they've got to think about is what they did and how they can be perceived. So, John Wayne Gacy did it. He flip-flopped all the time from being I did it to I didn't do it to I didn't, because they decide how they want to be seen. So they get to make all sorts of excuses for their behaviour.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, people will go, oh, I think that you had this, and if it's your mother's fault. So he gets to go, yeah, no, it was my mother's fault.
Exactly. Whereas you think, these people have been murdered. And if that was someone you knew that had been killed by him, how livid would you be that this bloke is just, did this, blah, 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 giving it the big one all the time, talking about what he's done. I just find it's strange, and I think there does come a point. I mean, by all means, have these things in an educational sense, but like you say, I think it's a problem of just having these things on YouTube.
Yeah, and people who write books about them as well and then profit from basically other people's murders. At least our podcast's free.
It is, indeed. And hopefully always will be.
He wanted at one point to get a probe put in his head to cut out a bit of his brain.
He's got too much thinking time.
Yeah, he has. To see if it cured him of his kind of psychotic, violent sexual behaviour. And they denied it because they thought that if they did it, he would be able to pretend that it had cured him and he would try and get parole and get let out, so they denied him. But he became a model inmate and still is. Works very hard, very conscientious. Reads books for the blind.
That's very kind of him, but I'd rather he didn't.
Yeah, those people not suffered enough.
They can sense it though, can't they?
Well,
they can sense that he's bad.
I hope that, like dogs, when they bark at a corner of the room when it's haunted. Guide dog's going ballistic when he walks in. At least they can't see him to be intimidated by him.
That's true.
But also, I hope they pick tasteful books. I hope it's not like Frankenstein or In Cold Blood. I hope it's like Rupert the Bear or something like that.
I hope it's 50 Shades of Grey. Something like that.
Fucking hell. He's just ad-libbing it all.
Yeah. Then he cut off her hair.
Yeah, he's been allowed several interviews. He was in this documentary in the 80s that John Wayne Gacy was in. excuse me, what they put out. Basically, it was a big television thing where the murderers would talk about their murders.
Oh, the murderer bumper special.
Yeah, I think like they have Disability Awareness Week on Channel 4. I think it was Psychopath Month or something on the BBC. And Robert Resler was writing a book about him, ex-FBI, and he had loads of interviews with him. And the third one, it was just him alone in the room with him by that time because they sort of built up a rapport. So he sort of came after 4 hours, came to the end of the interview, pressed the button, and the guard didn't come. They kept talking, and he pressed the button again, guard still didn't come. Kemper sees what's going on, senses that he's getting nervous. He can see him pressing the button, and he said to Robert Resler, "If I went apeshit in here, you'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't you? I could screw your head off, and I'd place it on the table to greet the guard." And then he said that Robert Resler and him were engaged in some mental games, and then finally the guard turned up, and then Edmund was like, "Oh, I was only joking, that's what I do for goofs, mate." I just pretended that he was joking the whole time, but he must have been so terrified, and rightly so.
Yeah,
don't go in there with a serial killer on your own.
Imagine just pressing the button, you're like, where are they? Pressing it. And
I get annoyed waiting for a lift.
Yes.
Let alone waiting for a guard to come to save my life from someone who's killed 8 people.
How busy are you in prison? How busy?
Sorry, I was waiting for the kettle to boil.
Yeah, sorry about that, mate. I have to say, Edmund Kemper, these interviews have provided me one of my favourite quotes from a serial killer, though, because they were asking him about stuff, and he said, sometimes I look at a chick and I'm like, I'd like to talk to her, date her, and then the other half of me just thinks, I wonder what her head would look like on a stick.
Fucking hell.
Mental. They also sent a psychology student when he was sort of pre-trial, called Cameron Jackson, to do a personality test on him. So they send a woman into this room with this man, and apparently he was absolutely fine with her.
Was her name Clarice Starling?
Her name was Clarice Starling. Towards the end, though, she started asking him questions about women, and he flipped.
Yeah.
He went utterly bonkers, flipping tables left, right and centre. And then on the documentary, it was very insightful because it says, seems his demeanour with the opposite sex may have been different.
Ooh, that's astute, isn't it?
That's really insightful. But yeah, he's still in there, still alive.
Yeah, popular writing subject, as I say. The serial killer forums that I'm on, they all talk about trying to write to him. I think he's replied to a couple of them.
God.
But it's scary, isn't it?
What do you write to these people?
I don't know. They don't know what the weather's like. They haven't got a window.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going, Eddie? Can I call you that? Maybe on letter 3.
Trying to write to him and explain what a Lena Dunham is these days. Things have moved on a lot since your time, Edmund. But the thing for me is the fact that he so clearly knows about psychology, knows about Freud, and is trying to pin it all on his mum. Because he just goes, I was so angry when he's crying, telling about how he killed her, and he's like, 6 people would be alive if it wasn't for her. He puts it all, it's like, no, you were the one that shot them. You were the one that cut their heads off. She didn't make you do any of that shit. And he just won't take responsibility for it at all. And they said, what do you think you would be doing if it wasn't for the murders and your mother? And he said, I think I'd be married now, I'd have kids. I'd probably be on my way to being a grandfather. No, you wouldn't. You'd be fucking the stumps of chicken necks somewhere. Because you're mad.
You're not like you.
Yeah, you're categorically mad. And it was always going to happen. It's just these things have helped.
Oh, God, he's awful, isn't he?
Yeah, so that is Edmund Kemper. Let's hope they don't let him out, because we'll be fucking first on his list.
Just imagine one day we just open the front door. It's a really tall man. Oh, God.
He'll be sat in the living room, the windows will go dark. He'll be like, bloody hell, the cloud's gone over the sun. No, Kemper's come round. That is episode 15. That's Ed Kemper. Next up, it's probably going to go to the live podcasts in Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. So first up, on the 8th of August, we've got Freddie Quinn doing Andre Chikatilo. Yeah. Please come and see the shows live. We'd love to see you there.
About Chikatilo.
Yeah, he's great and he's really scary. Soviet one again. Mm-hmm. Terrifying. If you enjoy this, just give us a little rating on iTunes. I think that helps more people find it. But there's bloody loads of you listening to it, which is really nice.
Yeah, and if you didn't like it, can you do me a favour and not write anything?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, just keep it to yourself.
Because it's a waste of everybody's time. Not that anyone else, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, and also, actually, people have been very kind. Also, serial killers probably really like us. So if you wanna slag us off, just see what happens. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. This has been All Killer, No Filler.